I work on the problem of email deliverability, which means understanding what right now appears to be an effective way to engage with our email service provider partners, our ESPs, as well as with the ISPs.
This is Time for Marketing, the marketing podcast that will tell you everything you've missed when you didn't attend the marketing conference. Hello and welcome to the Time for Marketing podcast, the marketing podcast where we bring you the best marketing conference speeches done in a short and brief 5-minute format. My name is Peter and I'll be your host in this episode in the same way as I was in the previous 14 episodes. This is episode number 15 and we will talk about email marketing. Before we go to our today's guest, you are of course very welcome if you like this episode and if you liked our previous episode to just go and subscribe to the podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Go to our website timeformarketing.com. You can subscribe to our email list there and we'll tell you for every new episode that we bring out that it's out. We'll just send you an email. And of course, if you think that we deserve that other people should listen to us, then go to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, or just, tell your friends, your marketing friends, your marketing clients, or your marketing agencies about this podcast, and they will listen in to it too. So, episode number 15 with me today is Scott Shou. Hello, Scott, and how are you doing?
Hi, Peter. I'm very well, thanks.
Nice to hear from you from the other side of the big blue sea. You are in the US. How is life in US?
It's very good. It's about to get a little cold, though.
You are actually happy. We'll never get this year. Obviously, we're not going to get snow. I just decided that this year's winter in Slovenia is going to be really, really bad, and because we never got any snow, we just get a lot of ice and black ice and all of that. So not fun. Scott, I've messaged you because you had a very interesting presentation at the MailCon conference. I must say this was the first time I've heard about this conference. Can you tell us a bit more of how was being at the conference? How were the topics there? Is there something interesting to see and to hear there?
Oh, sure. So MailCon is, I think it's a relatively new conference, maybe 4 years old, and a bit on the small side, I'd say about 600 attendees this past year. And usually it's a number of email marketers, agencies, folks who provide services to them, and of course advertisers, just getting together to talk about what they're doing, share some of their insights, and usual conference type knowledge sharing. But it is very focused on the topic of email, which, for many marketers is a really inexpensive way to work with a large amount of audience. And it's not always done well, but it can be very effective and very good on the ROI front.
You're the VP of strategy at the All Inbox agency. What do you do there? What does it mean, VP of strategy? What is your work? What are the things you have to do, and what are the things you like to do in your office?
Well, I like to do all of it, so that workaholic front may not be great for me, but the company is focused on trying to make email marketing effective, but we are we merged with a company called What If Media Group, which does a number of other ways of marketing to users, such as websites, SMS, etc. And what I work on is a combination of the data science and analytics that allows us to better target users and decide which is the most effective way for this user to be engaged with this advertiser. And on the other front, I work on the problem of email deliverability, which means understanding what right now appears to be an effective way to engage with our email service provider partners, our ESPs, as well as with the ISPs, the Googles, Yahoos, and et cetera of the world. It's a wide-ranging job, I would say, and that strategy piece is about finding the right balance between areas to focus and ways to diversify our overall risk so that the marketing is able to continue for for our clients.
And this is also what you had in your presentation at the MailCon conference, the question of how to achieve a good deliverability rate. And this is something that we'll hear about in your 5 minutes. So briefly, this is for the people who are not really home at email. This is how you make sure that your email that you're sending doesn't go into the spam folder or into the promotions folder. Am I right?
Well, I mean, depending on what we're doing, the promotions folder is sometimes just fine. But yeah, absolutely.
All right. So without further ado, Scott, here are your 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you, sir. I think, as you might have touched on in some of your previous podcasts, the state of email is that a lot of companies, right, will start working with a company like a MailChimp or Adobe or large service provider to handle the complexities of that email setup and sending portion, right? And they're really great, especially if you don't have a large technical division focused on the marketing piece. But oftentimes, I find a lot of partners end up working with agencies like us because of the fact that there is just a lot of complexity that is hidden, by those types of services. And so that's really the theme of my topic, which was email deliverability has a lot to gain by looking at dedicated IP style sending, meaning that where you own your own servers which handle the sending, right, the communication with the internet that on the other side goes directly to the ISP's servers. So now the gist was that there is a standard language, kind of like for the web part of the internet. HTTP is the defining language of how those websites are described and assembled. There is a language called SMTP, and SMTP really is all about how you, I suppose this is kind of like manners and etiquette, the right way to go to a email server and say hello and ask for the right to connect your email to your user's inbox, right? And it's a little bit formal, I suppose, but by looking at which point, right, in that communication with the receiving server, which point does the rejection or the delay or other message come back from the ISP, you can actually learn some things, right? And so just at a high level, everything starts with a connection request, meaning my server touches the other server and says, hey, are you willing to talk to me, right? And at that point, a lot of the types of controls and throttling that we'll see from the ISP side, it's not necessarily about your service or your company being a bad actor, but sometimes it's just about their capacity on their email server side, right? So, for example, Yahoo recently under AOL or under Verizon, excuse me, has merged their infrastructure with AOL, and during that merger, there was some headaches, right, on the infrastructure side. There were some delays and some services being knocked out here and there, and those server capacity issues are a real legitimate business issue. And so, if they've got previous experience with your mail server and your IP and know that you are a good actor, they would, for example, allow your emails through because they do a lot of business with Bank of America and their email agency. Whereas, for example, if you're a mom and pop's coffee shop and you have your list of 1,000 really caffeinated customers and they want to talk, Yahoo may very well say that, well, you're not on the whitelist, or maybe you're gray listed because you did something wonky in the past, and for those reasons, we're not going to let your connection through, right? And so that first initial connection request is that first opportunity for them to throttle their traffic, right? There was just to keep talking about Yahoo, there was an interesting interview with their CTO a little while ago where they were saying they cover on the order of 5 or 6 billion these types of requests every single day that get turned down just because they don't want to spend more of their capacity or infrastructure handling those messages, right? So if you don't want to be part of that, it helps to take a look at that. And then, the next thing that happens is you announce which from address you're coming from, then you announce which to address you're going to. And in each case, the ISP has an opportunity to say, well, we know about this sender, and this sender overall is good. But when it gets to the to address, it might say, well, the sender might be good overall, but this particular inbox has said that they don't really want mail from the sender. And so we're going to turn down this request at this point, right? And that way, before they have to load the entire email body, they can make decisions about what to turn on and what to turn off. So by looking at the email deliverability world this way, you're able to make some conclusions about where that reputation might be sitting, right? And if you kind of ignore these lower level reputation clues, then it's going to roll up and cause more and more problems for you. So your from address might initially have the reputation hit, but that might migrate up to your sending email server's domain and IP address, and ultimately maybe even taint the entire IP block because you weren't necessarily being a good steward of deliverability, right? And so that's the gist of my presentation.
All right. One of the questions that came up to me is what is criteria, when should I start thinking about moving from email marketing provider that does everything for me and then move to a self-hosted or self-cared for, or however we call that, an option where I should be very interested in
Right.
all of the things that you spoke about?
I think it's really a matter of how important email communications and the consistency and predictability of that communication is to your business. The ESP service providers do a really good job, and of course, as with most things in life, the more you pay, right? Some of those more boutique, high-end service providers definitely do have better service. But if you want full control over these things and be able to exercise, for example, some of the types of due diligence that I described in my presentation, I think what you're really looking for is that it's big enough of a revenue impact to your business and that you do have the internal expertise and knowledge to manage these kinds of infrastructure. It does take some specialized knowledge to manage an email server properly. And then in addition, I highly encourage folks to consider whether they have the analytics capabilities and technology internally to handle these things. Right? SMTP logs, just like a lot of server logs, are very noisy, but you need a way to sort through that very large amount of information and put that next to your metrics, your campaign metrics, right? And consider the two things together. The first instance of a bad response from an ISP may not necessarily be the downfall of your entire deliverability or campaign, but it's certainly a clue. And the better you're able to catch those types of things and start considering those trends and those patterns, right, as those pushback signs from the ISP side starts to gather up, the better you'll be able to manage your internal deliverability. So yeah, it does take a few things, and it's not the cheapest option on the market.
Getting very good deliverability and getting good results is not usually cheap. Sometimes when I try to help people to see how their email marketing is doing, I try to send them to the Google's Postmaster tool, where people can get the basic ideas about what Google thinks about their emails. Is this something that you would agree that would be maybe let's call it the first step into seeing what is going on with your emails? Or if not, is there a different way of what people can do to see what's going on with their emails?
I think that's an excellent first step. The Google Postmaster tools are one of the only places where Google exposes that kind of feedback. So it is a very important asset for anybody who's really serious about Gmail deliverability. And with our B2C customers, we often see that Gmail is somewhere in the 60-70% of their audience makeup, right? So it's a very important audience. So I absolutely agree with that advice. I think after that, the only thing I would say is that you have to make sure you are sending enough emails for Gmail to give you feedback. So for example, if you're sending 50 emails a day, it will take Postmaster tools a very long time to give feedback, and they may not actually give feedback at very small levels like that. They are finicky, and they have their own internal capacity issues and so on. So sometimes the feedback can be slower. So it's not a magic bullet, but you're absolutely right. It is a great first step, and it does provide some useful information.
All right, so let's wrap it here. We have 15 minutes, and we have the next step, that is Google's Postmaster tools, as the thing that can be a takeaway from this podcast. Scott, if people would like to get in contact with you, and if people would like to see you on the next conference, where can they find you? Do you have any conference plans for the future?
Sure. I usually do speak at the MailCon conference, and I think the next one is, I'm going to mess it up, but I will say it's later this year. And it should be on the East Coast this time, usually in New York. The other place where I've been active is the Internet Business Coalition. It is a lobbying group where we're trying to get together some folks who are interested as advertisers or as agencies like ourselves to advocate for more transparency in the feedback loop, right, from the ISPs. And that's going to be a website that's standing up on the ibccoalition.com site. And so that will likely generate some events, and that would be another way to interact with me.
All right. I'll add the link to the website, to the coalition, to the show notes, and we will also add your presentation to the show notes so that everyone who is more interested in all of the details can go and check it out on the podcast website, timeformarketing.com. Scott, I think this is the time where I tell you thank you very much for being a guest and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Peter. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.